Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CSPC 2024 pre-conference sessions. My name is Johnny. Before we start, I'd like to do a quick land acknowledgement. So here from Edmonton, Edmonton is located within the Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homeland and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. We acknowledge this land as the traditional territories of many First Nations, such as the Cree, Dene, Stoney, Sawtoo, and Blackfoot. So once again, my name is Johnny. I'm a volunteer here at CSPC within the program committee. Outside of volunteering at CSPC, I work as associate research scientist at a health economics and outcome research company. So this is the CSPC 2024 conference, and it features 6 short talks that range of interesting subjects and accomplished speakers. And each talk will last 8 minutes, followed by 2 minutes of questions. So once again, this is a seminar, so you won't be able to turn on your cameras or your microphones. So we encourage you to submit your questions through the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And we encourage you to upvote preferred questions as we have the questions for these speakers. Before we begin, CSBC would like to start by launching a demographic poll. So we get started with our first speaker. Our first speaker here today is Kim Portmas. Kim is the program lead for Science, Technology, and Policy Fellowship Program at the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research.
Thank you, Johnny, and thank you to all of the CSPC volunteers and staff for this wonderful opportunity to be here. I know it's a lot of work, so I really appreciate all of the effort behind the scenes to all the team. For purposes of this talk, I'll add to that introduction that I am a researcher. My background is in plant science, most recently in climate change governance and disaster risk reduction. But I am a researcher working to support research, particularly transdisciplinary research, finance, and implementation throughout the Americas, and also in capacity building for researchers and policymakers. And I'll also share that for purposes of this talk, which is titled The Transdisciplinary Approach for More Inclusive Science Policy and Diplomacy, by policy and diplomacy, I'm referring to international science policy, particularly in the area of global environmental change, as I represent the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. For example, multilateral agreements like the Paris Agreement, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The II's mandate for the last 30 years has been to finance global change research through a transdisciplinary multilateral approach to support our 19 member countries, including Canada. I'm joining you today from Panama, where our headquarters are currently located. We support these member states to address challenges that cannot be addressed by one single country alone. In addition to financing scientific collaboration, our mandate also tasks the IEI to improve public awareness and provide scientific information to governments for the development of public policy relevant to global change. Now, current geopolitical trends in the Americas at the time of application for this talk have drastically changed given recent elections in the US and other advances that we're seeing globally. So I wanted to openly state that as we go on with this topic. I think it's pertinent to what the discussion will be today, that in this ever-shifting world of policy and diplomacy, The challenges we face before are intensifying, including global north, global south, power asymmetry, political risks, and infrastructure, talent, and capacity imbalances. And we know that the burdens and risks of climate change are disproportionately carried by the global south. But the global north is not immune by any means, as seen with increased extreme weather events, wildfires, and the range of zoonotic diseases. I'm going to share a slide now quickly to get into. Can you see my slide okay, Johnny?
Yes,
Great. So quickly, how we understand science diplomacy. I've shared a couple of definitions here. These are some of the traditional definitions. And the matrix of science diplomacy in increased times of isolationism and nationalism, decreased support of even belief in science, puts the emphasis back on, in this middle definition, science for diplomacy. So scientific collaboration must continue despite the international relations between countries. And I would then challenge us all then to think, what kind of science are we doing? So given the new geopolitical climate, we must learn from our mistakes of working far too enshrined in our ivory towers, which I believe that all of you as participants of CSPC understand acutely. So I know that I am preaching to the choir. However, a shift to more TD science in applied fields is crucial. And just so that we have shared definitions of what TD science is, these are the nuances between the TD approach, the interdisciplinary approach, and the transdisciplinary approach. So the transdisciplinary approach encompasses not just diverse disciplines, but also non-academic knowledges or solution-oriented outcomes, which requires an epistemological shift in methods of reflection. And I shared there, we have a course that we'll be launching in the new year on from our TD Academy, which will be open and free to the public in Spanish, French, and Portuguese to learn more about the TD approach. But some of the key tenets really of TD science is that it is needed when knowledge about relevant problems is uncertain, and when there is great complexity, and when there's a lot at stake for those involved. So TD research deals with problems in a way that take into account the diversity of perceptions of problems, include academic and non-academic knowledge, and they develop solutions and actions that promote the common good. So I wanted to provide an example of this. In addition to multilateral agreements, I would add that policies passed and decisions made in the global north have cascading and long-term effects in the global south. For example, in Northern American countries, especially Canada and the US, have ramped up the transition from petroleum-fueled vehicles to electric vehicles. The demand for lithium for EV batteries is increasing. And the majority of the lithium used in these batteries is mined in South American countries, with over half of the lithium reserves in this lithium triangle, which includes Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. In my program, we've had a group of science technology policy fellows, mostly early career researchers from, in this case, the US, Argentina, Mexico, and Colombia, looking at ways to engage scientists and decision makers across borders, asking, if we develop policy recommendations to increase distributive justice and reduce the social and economic and environmental externalities along the lithium supply chain. So using a transdisciplinary approach to these policies, we could then consider both the extraction phase in sourcing countries and the disposal recycling phase in consuming countries. And this ended in a policy brief, which I share here, which is highlighted in the Journal for Science Policy and Governance. Another excellent example of regional TD scientific collaboration resulted in another policy brief that I'm sharing here on the existing or proposed policies that aim to mitigate plastic pollution for countries across the Americas. This project used members from Argentina, Brazil, Canada, and Jamaica. Because of the diversity of disciplines on this team, including a neuroscientist from Canada, who at that time was part of the MyTax Science Technology Policy Fellowship Program participating in my program, they introduced a behavioral framework to analyze and develop effective plastic pollution mitigation policies, noting that policy efforts do not always produce the desired outcomes, as we know, which is this concept of an intention action gap, which is a disconnect between the policy's intentions and the everyday behavior of stakeholders, who are people in the end. So we need to engage with people and understand these behavioral aspects. The groups worked with highlighting behavioral aligned recommendations for policies using an EAST framework to reduce the impact of plastic waste and pollution, as this is a transboundary issue. So being in Panama, Costa Rica could have the most amazing policy for banning plastics and single-use plastics, but we get the currents and still receive the plastic pollution. So this is an example of these kinds of issues that we're trying to address. Let's stop sharing. So I realize that all of us need to work within the current agendas of our governments, be it in policy agendas, but also in research agendas, as reflected through what kind of research is being financed, what kind of international collaborations are even allowed. Boundary spanning organizations like the II are even more important. So the II has founded a science diplomacy center, which provides a platform for various stakeholders, both researchers and policy practitioners, to build regional frameworks, identify cooperation priorities, build capacity in areas of emerging technologies and issues, and find ways to strategically elevate these topics to national and then regional policy and research agendas. But the skills needed to work in these multilateral, multicultural, transdisciplinary interfaces are lacking. And we have been investing in building these skills through the STEP program, which I run for about 4 years now. And our professional development program focuses on science diplomacy, communication, and transdisciplinary leadership. A publication about an NSERC program focused on One Health that I found recently was very interesting, as it looked at this concept that I find very true, that simply bringing people together, bringing skilled scholars together is just not enough. And so the research of this 5-year-long NSERC program actually drilled down on the specific TD leadership skills that I can very much corroborate with, that are very much needed. So they focus on teamwork, collaboration, communication, and conflict management. Reflexivity, which is the process of carefully considering assumptions regarding our own disciplinary and cultural standpoints. TD analysis, and the skills to meaningfully engage across societal sectors and with community partners in a real world context. So I will finish by asking what each of you are doing to build these skills individually, but also within the networks and institutions where you are working today, because I emphasize again, this is a long game to build human capacity across the region. This human capacity must be able to adapt to the high stakes geopolitical shifts and trends of today, and not give up on the role of evidence-informed policy and action to address our shared global challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, for your presentation. I think we have one question here from Lale. She asked, she thanked you for your talk and asked, it'd be great to know if there's any work done for computing and AI in your group.
Yes, yes, very much so. That's something that we've within the science diplomacy work that we're doing, we're including in science and innovation diplomacy. And AI has come up repeatedly as a request by our member states, actually. Um, the use of AI in global change research as one. And then also the impacts of AI infrastructure on power needed to run these huge supercomputers, and then the geopolitical shift that AI is is actively causing, with the role of private sector now having access to information and decision making and perhaps misinformation. Both ways, I would say it's a very powerful tool, but it can also be a very dangerous tool.
Mhm.
And how that is using that, how that is uh, having a role in the relationship in governments. And we see that in the US for sure, but then also in South America, as many countries are trying to find what their role is in this race for AI. So we have integrated AI into, and we have a science diplomacy curriculum that will also be launched in the new year. That's also free and open to the public, Spanish, English, Portuguese. There's an incredible case study, and all the case studies are focused from Latin America and the Caribbean. And there's one dedicated to AI to try and increase awareness of this issue.
Mhm.
Thanks for your question.
And I think we have a question from BPN as well. Um, you said your talk highlights a lot about the early research or early career researchers and want to see what are some of the key strategies to elevate their voices and ensure active participation in shaping policy, science policy.
Thank you, Bipin. This is an area that is very near and dear to my heart. Regardless of where we are in the world, I think career researcher programs, specifically fellowship programs, I'm a little biased, but I think fellowship programs are an excellent vehicle for learning and learning in real life. Um, I think early career researchers that want to get into the science policy interface or be more involved in science diplomacy, it is a departure from the traditional academic trajectory. And that's can be scary and a gamble. And so being part of a fellowship program really helps you um, try it on for size and get the kind of professional development training and the mentorship that you need to figure out if that's the career path that you want to take as an early career researcher, and being brave enough to say, this is something that I enjoyed and really want to pursue, which in my program we've had, I would say, more than half of the cohort has wanted to continue in this interface work, as we call it. And then others have returned back to academia, which is fine, I always say, but at least they're returning back to academia with this new knowledge and set of skills that enables them to have a more global perspective of the research that they're doing, and perhaps more a transdisciplinary approach to the work that they're doing. Thanks for your question, Vipin.
Thank you very much, Kim, for your presentation. Just want to remind everybody that to please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen for any questions that you may have. And we can, um, anything else, we can also pass it on to our speakers at the end of the short talks as well. So moving on, we can go on to our next speakers. Our next speakers are Dr. Henrietta Bennett and Dr. Edris Madadian. Dr. Henrietta Bennett is the chair of the Canadian Association of Postdoctoral Scholars, and Dr. Edris Madadian is the head of the Science Laboratory Network at the Geological Survey of Canada, Natural Health Resources. And I'll pass the spotlight to them.
Thank you, Johnny, for the introduction. I'm just going to share my slides. Excellent. So I'd also like to point out that Edris was actually a former chair of the Canadian Association of Postdoctoral Scholars as well. And the last question for Kim's talk is a really excellent transition to our subject about career paths and opportunities for Canada's postdoctoral researchers. And to get started, let's first ask the question, what is a postdoc? And it's not the easiest question to answer because every postdoc is unique, speaking both about the people who do postdocs, but also the type of postdoctoral position. Our definition is roughly that it's a temporary position held by professional researchers or scholars after their PhD en route to their permanent position. And put simply, it is a job to get a job. The other statistic I would use to explain what a postdoc is this number, 77%. This is the percentage of postdocs that begin their postdoc with an academic tenure track job goal. So that's really one of the driving factors. If you want an academic tenure track job goal, you have to go through a postdoctoral period after graduating with your PhD. And so when we think about the path, we have most postdocs starting with that goal. However, we know that the vast majority of postdocs will not actually achieve a tenure track job. From various sources, the rates of success are 10 to 20%, which is probably around 1% of all PhD holders. So clearly, in terms of where our highly trained postdoctoral scholars are going, there's going to be some variation along the way. A lot of the data that we'll be presenting in this talk are from the 2020 CAPS National Survey. And with that, I pass it to Edris.
Thanks, Heini. And to put things in perspective, this slide shows the intense competition that postdocs have to go through for academic positions in Canada that Heini was talking about. So with over 10,000 postdocs and only 97 universities, the chance of securing a tenure track job is obviously very low. Given these odds, it's critical to ask that are we providing postdocs with enough non-academic professional skills to prepare them for career outside of academia. Most professional developments offered in the universities is focused on academic skills, yet we know that not every postdocs will end up in academia. So this highly educated group needs pathways to succeed in diverse careers, which means they require skills like project management, communications, networking, those kind of skills that often overlooked in traditional academic training. So as we look at this competitive market, the question remains that are we equipping our postdocs with the tools they need to thrive beyond academia? Over to you, Henny.
It's actually
yeah. Yeah, so this is the slide that the numbers and the information that we have captured in the national survey. This slide provides an overview of the comprehensive data collected through our CAPS national survey, which serves as a important and informative resources for understanding the experiences and challenges faced by postdocs in Canada. Our surveys are being done every 4 years, and the last one was done in 2020. And it covers a wide range of topics, including demographics, such as age, gender, marital status, citizenship, as well as salary, benefits, challenges faced by postdocs, and career development and opportunities. We also capture insights on career outcomes and postdoc satisfaction levels over the time, which helps us to illustrate the evolving landscape for postdocs. So the estimated number of postdocs in Canada, based on what we recorded in our last survey, has grown significantly from 6,000 in 2009 to now over 10,000, which indicates an increase in the need for support and resources tailored to this growing populations. Our 22 national survey is available in that link that was in the previous slide, and you can just scan it over the QR code, or you can just write the link in your browser just to have access to. In the next slide, I just want to have a 2022 20 Canadian postdocs at a glance and the demographics. It shows us that a snapshot of who's Canadian postdocs, and most are aged between 25 to 54 with an average age of 33. Gender is balanced almost with 48 versus 49 for women as men. 61% of the postdocs are international. Out of that 10,000 that we're talking, showing the global draw of Canadian research, though this can present unique challenges too. And 27% have dependent, which has decreased from previous years, which is likely reflecting the instability and the financial strains in postdocs roles. And finally, 71% of the postdocs have employee status, which while others are classified as students and contractors, sometimes guests, and it impacts their access to benefits and stability. But beyond this demographic data, you can just see that it's important to understand the broader context of the postdocs experience in Canada. The postdocs, normally the period of being a postdoc in Canada is maximum up to 5 years. And most of the respondents for this last national survey were in the first or second year of their postdocs. And in Canada, postdocs are typically fellows or researchers, while research associates is often a more advanced title that it's being used in the academic institutions in Canada.
So Edris already started talking about some of the challenges that we captured in our survey. And in the context of career paths, the primary challenge is that postdocs are working in temporary positions that are not optimally supporting their transition to permanent jobs. Most postdocs start their postdoc with an academic job as their goal. Of course, most do not reach that goal. So the other statistic I want to share from the survey is that 44% of postdocs in non-academic careers are rating their postdoc as moderately to not at all important. And you can cut this statistic in two ways. The opportunity we have is that a large number of postdocs, even in non-academic careers, are finding this career step to be important for their career path. But 44% is really too large a percentage of postdocs who are highly trained and talented individuals to be finding this career step not useful. I think this highlights the need for improved professional development, especially for the non-academic career track. And this short talk is focusing on career paths, but we also must mention that there are systemic issues that postdocs face. These include low pay, short contracts, lacks of benefits, mental health challenges, experiences of harassment, poor administrative support, and all of these are critical challenges which present barriers to career advancement for our PhDs.
So following Henny's point on the professional development, again, it highlights a key challenge that there is a lack of professional development resources for our postdocs. From our survey, 45% of the postdocs report no access to career development resources outside of academia. 34% are dissatisfied with their career options, feeling limited due to like the gaps in training and non-academic skills. And the top three areas that they have been seeking training more is grant writing, career development of any kind, and also the project management. All of them are crucial for both academic and non-academic jobs. So CAPS advocate for more robust development programs, obviously, but what we did in our national survey was just to compare, to gauge the satisfaction with the training quality, and to compare that with the postdocs abroad to see that how it's reflected. And as you see in the small table on the bottom right of the slide, it is that the research training scores the highest at 4.3 overall, with postdocs abroad reporting even higher satisfaction at 4.7. When it comes to areas like teaching scores, it's like 2.7, it's slightly higher in Canada at 2.8 versus 2.6 abroad. And also, three main things that we wanted to mention here is that there is a gap in communications and networking training, as well as there are other items too that we have not highlighted that here, but obviously postdocs abroad based on this number rate these higher, 4 point communications and 3.7 for networking compared to 3.6 and 3.2
Sorry,
in
for the sake of
Canada.
time, I'm going to blast through the next slides. Part of the data that we get from the survey is not only about training needs, but also what goals are. About a third of postdocs change their career goals, obviously, with not all postdocs reaching that tenure track job. I won't read them out, but we have a list of what the new goals are for postdocs, and we've highlighted in this slide ones where we see increased interest since 2013. In terms of why these goals changes occur, decreased interest in academia, lack of job opportunities, and personal or family issues are some of the main reasons. And we also highlighted a number of really concerning gender disparities in career paths. Women were more likely to change their career goals during postdoc, and they're also less likely to go into permanent research positions like tenure track or even industrial research positions. And so with that, I'm going to transfer to some personal recommendations. I hope we have at least 1 minute left, and we'll start with Edris.
Thanks, Annie. And just a quick on my end is just through my own career journey, I've realized that the self-care is not just about work-life balance, which is normally considered as one of the main indicators. So it's also important to take active steps in our career growth. So self-care means that being fully attentive to our own development and being proactive in the shaping our path. There are four items that I think that Hani and I, we both agree on this, that the skills diversifications, the alternative pathways, mentorship and networking and career flexibility is really important. And just on my own side is, I believe that it's important that you consider your skill sets than one or two skills that you have. Sometimes there are opportunities on other sectors that you don't normally see that, and it's important to be considering them. And over to you, Hank.
So to wrap it up, I have some QR codes here, but for general follow-up and contact info, you can always check out our website and we'll post these slides there. And I think CSPC will also post them. The official recommendations from CAPS are for individual postdocs to self-advocate and to network. Institutions should match their career development resources to some of the career paths that postdocs are now taking, not just that academic track. And with keeping in mind that postdocs already have training from their PhD, and so we should really be focusing on professional development. For funding agencies, we also want to see a broadening of postdoc funding eligibility criteria, and we've made some very specific recommendations at the federal level this year from both the Budget 2024 implementation recommendations that we've submitted, as well as some consultation for the capstone agency. I think we're at time, so I will leave my personal recommendations to Q&A if that's possible, and we'd be happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Henrietta and Edris, for your presentation. We do have a question here. So what happens to 50 to 60% of postdocs who are interested in academia career, but do not secure a tenure track job according to your survey, or 20% do not cover this number?
I think we can both answer that question, Edris and I, because I think we've both been in this path. My last day as a postdoc is actually tomorrow, and I was definitely one of those 77%, and I'll be moving into a research associate career, which could be a permanent position. It doesn't mean I'm totally blocked from still becoming an independent investigator, but it means it would be a hard path to get back on. So the answer is that there's a lot of dissatisfaction, I think, because of this mismatch. And some of that, I think, has to do with the ways that the system is set up to really narrow the focus of what postdoctoral work is, when it should really be improving that kind of different broadening of different skill sets like Edris was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think there's no other questions here, so we can move on to our next speaker.
Thank you.
Or actually, we have one question here in the chat. Under what mechanisms additional career training should be offered?
So part of this has to do with improving the types of funding that postdocs can have access to. So this is what I would have said in my personal recommendations corner. I've done 2 postdocs, and they've been both approximately 2 years each. In my first appointment, I would say this was pretty successful because I developed a vision for an independent research program. In my second position, I was unable to find a supervisor who would let me keep developing my individual program versus working on their projects in their lab. And I think something that could have supported that was, in general, some cultural change about postdocs being viewed as professional researchers and more like a junior colleague as opposed to a trainee, but also having an opportunity to apply for funding that would support my research and not just a fellowship that would support my salary. And these are all things that CAPS has been working on in our advocacy agenda year after year.
Mhm. Got it. And I think we have time for one more question. Does it appear if the recommendations are being actioned, like if they're receiving seeing any results from that?
I think they are certainly being listened to, and part of the work that we do at CAPS on, completely a volunteer basis is to make sure that we talk to as many people who are relevant as possible. And I think there's a good chance. The tri-agency training strategy that was released in September actually addressed a lot of the points that we were interested in. For one, broadening eligibility for international students or students and postdocs, but then also considering some of the flexibility that might go into fellowship holders. And we think that would also be helpful in terms of equity and gender inclusion. So it seems like we are moving in the right direction in terms of stated priorities from our funders, but we don't have the commitment as to what those policies will actually be. So progress is being made, but we should still be working on it.
Awesome. Thank you. And actually, one more question here. So your data highlights disparities between men and women during and after their postdoc years. What specific recommendations can institutions and funding agencies implement to address these gender disparities in research careers?
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit in the last one. Some of this has to do with broadening eligibility criteria for the funding that's available, but we'd also seek more flexibility and support from institutions. For a concrete example, I heard about a postdoc who received funding for childcare to support attendance at a conference, and the institution had no mechanism to pay that funding, and so they couldn't go. They couldn't receive the grant, and they couldn't go to the conference, which is just a shame. So part of it, I think, is flexibility. We all know that we're living and working in a system that was not designed with our current workforce in mind. And so I think part of it is trying to support researchers over kind of blindly implementing certain policies.
Got it.
Just to quickly mention that based on our survey, the 2020 survey, the gender is balanced, 48% versus 49. But obviously the question is about the fellowships, if it's being offered equally, but we have looked at all sort of postdocs, regardless of what's the source of funding for their period of being postdoc.
I'll also add the equal gender ratio that we have suggests, the door is open, but what is on the other side of the door is not appealing or attractive in terms of retention. And so that's something I think that academia as a whole and research culture as a whole has to work on.
Thank you again. Thank you very much, Henrietta and Edris, for answering your questions and also presenting today. So I think we can move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Stacia Thompson McCoy. And Stacia, she earned her PhD in civil and environmental engineering and engineering and public policy from the Carnegie Mellon University, and her BSc in civil and environmental engineering from the Princeton University. So I'll pass it on to you, Stacia.
Thank you. Just gonna get my slides ready. There they are. Okay, good afternoon. And as Johnny said, I'm Stacia Thompson McCoy, and I'm the program developer for the NSERC Chair Program for Women in Science and Engineering, the Prairie region, also known as WISE Planet. And today I'll be talking about practices to make glue work matter. So WISE Planet's vision is to create a diverse, inclusive, equitable, and just society by giving historically underrepresented groups in STEM the power to make change happen. And we empower these individuals through workshops that teach them non-technical skills, enabling them to be change leaders in their organizations. The content of my talk is taken from one of these workshops. Now, what do I mean when I say glue work? Glue work is non-technical tasks in a technical workplace or office setting that are necessary for a team to be successful. These tasks range from complex activities such as resolving team conflict and building team communication protocols to everyday organizational needs such as scheduling meetings, taking notes, onboarding new team members, document organization, and report writing. Tanya Riley, formerly a senior principal software engineer at Squarespace, who coined the term glue work, refers to these tasks as the less glamorous and often less promotable work that needs to happen to make a team successful. Glue work is critical to an organization's function and its capacity to develop and retain technical talent. So glue work helps teams meet deadlines, communicate effectively, and perform successfully. It's important to highlight that doing glue work well is a skill that not everyone has. It's not just about sharing undesirable tasks, and it has impact. Having a managed onboarding process can mean the difference between a new employee feeling isolated or quickly becoming a productive member of the team. Here's a short illustration to show how glue work can affect two engineers. Alice and Bob are hired as junior software engineers by a company. In year one, their tasks are pretty similar, with about 80% coding work and 20% report writing, documentation, and other non-technical support work. Fast forward 2 years, Alice is very skilled at developing code documentation protocols, so now spends about 80% of her time on these more glue work tasks and 20% on coding, while Bob continues with 80% coding and 20% non-technical support work. After their performance reviews, Alice is told, "You're not technical enough," and Bob is promoted. Clearly, glue work can help organizations, but it can hurt individuals. Research finds that women are often given more housekeeping and administrative tasks, which reduces their impact in other more visible areas such as research and publishing. So there is evidence that women often do glue work and get no credit, while men tend to get promoted for not doing glue work. But it's not all bad. When recognized and managed, glue work can build and demonstrate strong leadership skills. But on the other hand, when unrecognized and undervalued, glue work can be depleting and career limiting, particularly for women and underrepresented groups in STEM, who often do a disproportionate amount of this work. Clearly, practices to recognize, value, and actively manage glue work or make glue work matter yield positive outcomes for individual and organizational success. So, what actions can individuals and organizations take to recognize and manage this work? Here are some recommendations for individuals. Have frequent conversations with your manager to set clear expectations about your career goals. Get an updated job title that accurately reflects your work. Record the impact of your glue work so leaders and managers can easily recognize your contributions. For organizations, you could add glue work tasks to job descriptions and performance reviews. Show through equal pay that technical and non-technical work is equally important. Start a peer recognition program to highlight colleagues' contributions, and host events to build relationships and lower barriers for colleagues seeking help. Here are some examples of organizations that have implemented practices, either formal or informal, on various scales to recognize, value, and manage glue work. Atomic Object, which is a software design and development consultancy, created a peer recognition program and made share the pain or allocate glue work effectively a company value. Squarespace, a website builder software company, supported Tanya Riley in her advocacy for glue work management. Wise Planet workshop participants from Pembina Pipeline Corporation, an oil and gas provider, have implemented practices to take turns booking meetings, taking notes, and sharing other tasks within their unit. Glue work recognition and management can yield very positive outcomes, including more successful team performance, increased retention of technical talent, more opportunities for leadership skills development, which can facilitate better transitions to management roles. This can also improve career advancement for individuals, as well as overall advancement for women and underrepresented individuals into senior leadership positions. Effective recognition and management of glue work also helps develop high-performing collaborative research teams that exhibit positive interdependence of team members, effective communication, and individual and group accountability. Research also shows that gender-diverse teams produce more novel and impactful scientific discoveries, and that having more women in management positions increases economic productivity. Thus, the positive outcome of improved career advancement, particularly for women and underrepresented individuals, also has positive impacts on scientific research and economic productivity. In summary, glue work is non-technical work that enables technical teams to perform successfully. These tasks are the glue that holds the team together. So without effective recognition and active management of this work, transdisciplinary and geographically disparate teams will fail to perform successfully and to develop effective solutions for the global challenges that we face, such as the climate crisis, food security, AI, biotechnology, and global health. Recognition and management of glue work can yield increased productivity, high-performing collaborative research teams, and more novel and impactful scientific discoveries, which is what the next generation of STEM researchers and workers needs. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Stacia, for your presentation on glue work. Let me see, we have any questions here. Let's see, one question. How can recognizing and managing glue work provide opportunities for developing critical leadership skills and opportunities for junior employees?
Well, when you look at what a manager does or what someone in a senior leadership role position do, they essentially do mostly glue work. And so having the opportunity to recognize and encourage junior employees to participate glue work and be more comfortable with those tasks will make them more ready for management and senior leadership positions when they get to those roles.
Mhm. Thank you. And I think that is, let me double check the Q&A box, but I think that's it for the questions. Thank you again, Stacia, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Or we have another question here in the box here. Your research points to a disproportionate amount of glue work being assigned to women in STEM. What strategies can organizations implement to ensure a more equitable distribution of this work and support leadership development for these junior employees?
Well, I think a great example is the Atomic Object. That was the software design and development consultancies because they actually made share the pain a company value. So by acknowledging it that everyone needs to participate in these tasks, and also then having the managers more deliberately assign them and make sure that everyone's participating. That's a good way to make sure that the tasks are distributed more deliberately and more equitably.
Mhm. Okay. I think that's the last question. Thank you again, Stacia, for your presentation and answering the questions. I think we all have a better understanding of glue work and how we can implement changes and using that towards also career development and advocating for our actions in our jobs. So I think we can move on to our next speaker, which is Palish Sanyal. So Palish Sanyal is a seasoned sustainability professional distinguished by its global engagement in training that converges management, governance, and sustainability. So I'll pass it to you, Palish, for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Palash Sanyal. A couple of other things I just wanted to mention quickly is that I am the principal or founder of a company called Governing Water. We provide training for organizations on water strategy or sustainability strategy, as well as just giving them a piece of the education that they need to know from a company's perspective when it comes to water. We work with organizations like World Bank, for Foresight Canada, and some other for-profit organizations, which, because of disclosure purposes, I can't mention them. But I also sit on a few different boards, including an insurance company in the prairies, Supply Chain Canada, the Trans Canada Trail. And as you can imagine, today's presentation will be focused on very much on water. So right now there is that COP29 taking place in Baku, Azerbaijan. Usually I'm at the COP, but this year I decided not to go there. Had some other work commitment that needed me to be in Latin America, so I'm in Latin America right now. So as we navigate an era marked by climate urgency, I want to turn our attention to the critical but often underestimated element in our climate narrative, which is water. So again, when we discuss climate change, we tend to focus on carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, renewable energy. These are all essential components. Yet, we overlook the critical messenger of climate change, water. So I'll give you one example. I had the privilege or good fortune, some may think misfortune, of working with people who call themselves climate change deniers. And in that process, whenever you go in and start talking about climate, what ends up happening, you go nowhere. But once you start framing that conversation in a different way, the things they care about, which includes actually water, the mindset shift drastically happens. And that has been my experience talking with folks that in the initial phase did not believe in climate change, but later on, I mean, they might have been still a skeptic at some level, but their hard no kind of became soft no, and they were trying to listen more openly. So today I will explore why I think water is the next carbon, how it acts as a climate indicator, and why water metrics are vital for corporate disclosure. So the first point, as I was mentioning, like why water is the next carbon. Water, much like carbon, is intertwined with every aspect of our ecosystem, economy, social infrastructure. While carbon emissions drive the warming of our atmosphere, water is an integral, localized indicator of that impact, of that warming. Consider this, like just as carbon footprint tracking has become essential for assessing corporate and national environmental impact, water use and management can reveal a company's or country's ecological footprint, highlighting both resource use and social impact. So one of the biggest controversy with carbon is that measuring what you're producing, who is using it, is there double counting that is happening? When it comes to water, it is easier to track. What goes in should come out. If if there's something missing in the process, there's a leak happening. The quality of water that is coming in, the quality of the water that is going out, if it's different, that is a responsibility for the corporation. So that's been something I have been promoting in my work throughout the world. Carbon emission reflect long-term environmental damage. In contrast, water issues, whether scarcity, pollution, or extreme weather, they manifest really quickly, visibly, and directly impact local communities and ecosystem. Like, how do you see water as a climate change indicator? You see hurricanes, you see flood, drought, snow, more rain, everything that indicates climate is actually through water. The other element I wanted to mention is that the world, if you look at the places now, the drier places are getting drier and wetter places are getting wetter. Recently, there was a flood that happened in Spain. And most folks, what they don't know about, they were going through a drought, right? The flood itself was the climate event, the extreme climate event, but it also hampers the way we plan. I'll give another example. In Canada, there's been more and more forest fires happening, and the fire season is starting earlier. Before, the firefighters use that time when in winter and other times, use that time to prepare. Now, the resource mobilization as well as the preparation phase, they can't predict like when they should start. So it's kind of like becoming you're in crisis management mode throughout this whole 12 months, okay? So I talked about water as the next carbon. I talked about water as the climate indicator. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the water in corporate disclosure and the next frontier of sustainability. Just as companies today disclose their carbon footprint, water metrics are emerging as an equally important factor in environmental, social, and governance disclosures. Now, whether it's going to sound the same, whether people are going to call it ESG or not, that's a different question, but it's going to stay there. We might call it differently, right? We call things differently over time, over generation. Transparency around water uses, conservation effort, water-related impacts will allow stakeholders, and today it's allowing, to understand a company's commitment to sustainable practices and its exposure to climate risk. So water, people can understand. Carbon oftentimes are misunderstood by general public. Okay, so I will stop there. I had a couple of other points, but there's one specific element I will mention here is the conflict part. There's a lot of conflict coming out of climate, and those conflict, if you brew down to the main causes, you will see water plays a big role in those conflict and crisis situations. And many has predicted that the Third World War might be about water. Okay, so that's something I've been working on, creating more awareness and training on how to manage some of those conflict. So I'll stop there. If there's any questions, happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Palash, for your presentation. One question we have is, given the water-related issues are often sidelined in climate discussions, what are some key policy changes you recommend to elevate the role of water in the global climate policy and planning?
It's a great question. So I think any job, part of any job, 10% of it is to educate people. You know, and that education piece must include water. In the climate adaptation and mitigation conversation that I'm having, I always feel, again, one simple distinction here is that I'm not asking every scientist to be a communicator. What I'm asking, that part of your job, 10% of it, is to communicate what you're doing, how you're doing, and that water aspect in the policy domain needs to be there. One of the other things I did in my previous role, I was the government relation person for one of the biggest water institute. And I was talking with asset managers, investors, Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, New York State Teachers Pension Plan, California State Police Pension Fund, Australian superannuation. The conversation starts with them as well, not with the policy only, because those are the people who have money and they invest in different infrastructure, different commitments. Once you make them aware about water in a different lens, they are the ones who will be pushing for those policy. I think that's a good approach that I saw very much bringing reward, and the ROI, the return on that investment and the time commitment is actually better in that aspect. I'm giving the answer in a tangent way, but hopefully that answers.
Thank you very much for your answer. Another question we have is, how can we better integrate water-centric strategies to climate change or climate action plans to ensure more effective adaptation and mitigation measures?
So again, part of it, I always say educate, educate, educate. Like if I know something 10 out of 10, if I communicate 2 out of 10, I'll only get 2, right? So part of this adaptation and mitigation, if you look at the core of any adaptation and mitigation strategy, like in the intervention, not the strategy, the intervention focuses a lot on water, like wetland restoration or some other specific elements, So I would say always to focus on trying to educate, because in the sense that you don't want to change their mind. First, you want to have a conversation so that they become open to your ideas. In the policy setting, another aspect that I found has worked for me before is not going with an agenda to policymakers. It's more about connecting with them, giving them the information, understanding what information they need, and last but not the least, packaging it for them. It's not telling all the scientific fact. It's not telling all the scientific fact. It's more about telling a story that can connect with them.
Got it. Thank you very much for your answer. I think that's all the questions that we have here. So thank you again, Palash, for your presentation on water, and it's been very informative in terms of how that can be used in terms of measure for climate change. I think we can move on to our next speaker. And our
Thanks,
next
John.
speaker, yeah, no worries. Our next speaker is Dr. Lale Bajet, and Dr. Lale Bajet is a professor at the Department of Electrical and Software Engineering at the University of Calgary, and the NSERC Chair for Women in the Science and Engineering for the Prairies. And I'll pass it on to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much. So today I'm going to be talking about bridging sustainability and society and leveraging transformative scenario planning. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 in southern Alberta, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. So as was mentioned, I'm Lale Behjad. I'm professor in electrical and software engineering, as well as sustainable systems engineering at the University of Calgary, and the NSERC Chair for Women in Science and Engineering. My program is Vice Planet, which I work with Stacia at. And this presentation is with my colleague and friend, Taran Meisami, who is a hearing commissioner from Alberta Energy Regulators. Unfortunately, she was not available to come. So there's a new dawn in the world with many technological advances that we can use to make opportunities for people to basically become more just and inclusive society. But unfortunately, the fire is at our feet, especially as you heard from our last speakers. We both literally and figuratively, we have going through a lot of change, and not all of it is things that we want to keep. So the question I will be asking is, what will be our reality in the future? Will we get to this place which is equitable and inclusive, or will we have a future that is and that is sort of controlled by people who have power and money and keep on accumulating more power and money? So I want to first talk about two types of realities. The first one is the natural realities, and the natural realities are the ones that we have control over. We have no control over. These are things like gravity, laws of thermodynamics, and evolution. We cannot sort of decide that we want to change gravity and tomorrow it will change. However, to change natural realities, what we can do is we can use them to make technology to do this. So this is sort of an example is the International Space Station, which is inside the gravitational zone of Earth, but it is going so fast that everything is free falling, giving a perception that everything is floating and there is no gravity. So this is a way that we can control or use natural gravities through technology. These realities actually come to a kind of problems that are called kind problems. These are not problems that are easy, but they are clearly formulated. They are constraints. They have rules that don't change because they're natural rules. And then we have relevant information, or we know how we can get those informations. And it is clear when we have found a solution. However, we also have imagined realities, and these are social realities that we have control over. So we have control over economy, money, Bitcoin, debt, government, social structures, and so on. These are our imagined realities, and these are the stories we tell ourselves and believe in. To change these natural realities, we need to make new stories and have many people believe in these new stories for the narrative to change. So these problems usually also, to change these, they become wicked problems. So these are wicked problems that have no formulation, there's no stopping rules, there is no one solution or no immediate solution, and every wicked problem is related to other problems. And then if you try to solve them, you also bear the consequences for them. And so there's basically everything everywhere all at once that you need to solve for these. Now, our natural realities that are related to climate crisis are very dire. And these are going from the fires, droughts, floods, migrants, and hurricanes. And what we try to sometimes do is try to solve this with these technological solutions. So using carbon capture, for example, to solve them. But this is our problem. The barrier to sustainable solutions is not a lack of viable technology or scientific understanding, but it is rather the absence of imagination and effective communication between different people. So there's more going towards the wicked type of problems, especially super wicked, because they are happening all the time. So transformative scenario planning is a way to try to solve these problems. These transformative scenarios are not a forecast, projection, plan, or proposal or option, but they're basically stories about what can happen in the future. A good example of a transformative scenario planning is from South Africa in 1991-1992, right after Nelson Mandela was freed from jail. A group of people, led by Adam Kahane, got together in Montfleur and started to try to do scenario planning for South Africa. At the time, the talk was that there's two options for the future of South Africa: a practical option and a miraculous option. The practical option would be for all the people to get down on their knees and pray for a band of angels to come down from heaven and solve our problems for us. And this is sort of sounds like a problem that we are all praying for, especially since last week. Then there's a miraculous option that would be for all the people to talk and work together to find a way towards to forward and implement that miraculous options. Now, for in the South African case, they were able to actually implement the miraculous option. So for doing the transformative scenario planning, we need to actually have a group of people convene and get together. So this is scientists, policymakers, communicators, and so on. Then we go and make those scenarios. This is basically telling ourselves what are the stories for the future. And then finally communicating these for the impact. So this is making better policies and better communication for this. An example of how this can actually result in is, or some good news for people who might be a little bit depressed, like me, in these times, is that through these discussions and these plannings, we can keep our hope alive and make progress. And the example is yesterday, there was a good news that Canada has joined the clarion call for the High Ambition Coalition at COP22. Which was led by the island nations to keep the Paris Agreement alive. So we are actually writing a future story where the Paris Agreement is alive, and we're working all together around the world to get to actually manage the climate crisis. So I want to finish my talk with this quote from Margaret Heffernan, is when we trade the effort of doubt and debate for the ease of blind faith, we become gullible and exposed, passive and irresponsible observers of our own lives. Worse still, we leave ourselves wide open to those who profit by influencing our behavior, our thinking, and our choices. At that moment, our agency in our own lives is in jeopardy. So what I would like everybody to ask on this call, and who will be listening to this presentation later, is that to make yourself ready for debate and the doubting, and don't put your blind faith into what can happen will happen. So with that, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Lali, for your presentation on the transformative scenario planning. I think one question we have is, you emphasize the importance of TSP for sustainability. How can this approach be adapted and applied to address urgent climate change challenges on the global scale, and in particular in areas of high uncertainty?
Yeah, so the transformative scenario planning is made for the areas of high uncertainty, that because we cannot predict or plan for when the work is really big. The most important part is to be with a small group of people who can work together and bring in different perspectives to the plan. Then you need to actually put time aside to be able to debate and discuss what can be done. The other thing I would say is that this is a very crucial time in the world history, that we are sort of told that everything is inevitable. So there's a politics of inevitability, and not accepting that and making sure that you have physical presence and working with people who can gather together. So we talked about water earlier today. Can we have a group of experts on water, communities that have lack of water, don't have clean water, people who are policymakers for our water, and so on, get together and discuss that one topic together, and then make scenarios for the future. That's one part of it. And then the other part is we need to capture people's imagination, because people don't understand what are the possible, what is a just, equitable society. So if we talk about energy transitions and just energy justice, people don't understand what that means. And so we need to better talk about this and show them what are these policies and how will they be affected.
Mhm. Thank you very much. I think the other question we have here is about the key components of TSP and how we can train for them and use that to address sustainability and climate changes.
Yeah, so very good question. And it has a lot of, I actually had put a lot more slides, but because of the time limit, I took them out.
Mhm.
But I would suggest that if you want to know more, the book by Adam Kahane, The Transformative Scenario Planning, has both all the ways to do this, as well as some examples of this being done. The Mount Flora example I talked about in South Africa, they have to talk about the Colombia example and some examples that actually did not work out. So, for example, Haiti had done a transformative scenario planning and it did not work out. So, understanding those, I think one of the things I have learned the best is that um, ability to work together and ability to understand that you are not always correct. You have to hear someone else's perspective and understand what they are, even though if you don't agree with it, hearing and understanding and then trying to figure out what would be the solution better that works best for everyone is important.
Mhm. Okay. I think that's it for the questions. Thank you again,
Thank
Ali,
you.
for your presentation and for answering questions on the transformative scenario planning. So I think with that, we can move on to our next portion, which would be the feedback polls. So I'll have you can launch that for us. Okay. So while everybody fills out the poll, I'd like to thank everybody for attending the session and also like to thank you all the amazing speakers for their time and their presentations and also giving us the answers to the questions that were provided throughout the session. So we encourage everyone to stay tuned for future pre-conference events and to check the CSPC website and social media for details. So we also launched a short poll for feedback and please get feedback, fill that out before exiting the session. And I'd like to thank everybody again and pass it on for any last remarks from our team. Okay. So I think there's no other comments or queries, so I can close the session. Once again, I'd like to thank everybody for attending and also our speakers for presenting today. Any other questions, feel free to message us or pass it on, and we'll pass it to our speakers or answer any queries that were unaddressed. Thank you, everybody.